All right, and welcome to Herstory, the Women of the Multi-Style Movement. My name is Annie Savage, and I'm very pleased to welcome the following women to our panel. We have Lyonn Lieberman, Renata Bratt,
Hi.
Beth Fortune, Martha Mooke, and Enion Pelta-Tiller. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for your time and for being here. The purpose of this panel is to provide a space for some of the women in the alternative or eclectic and now multi-style movement, a space to share a bit of our experience, a bit of our knowledge, and our hopes and dreams for the future. And so I would like to start with Lyonn Lieberman, who we are thrilled to have with us today. Julie, you are the seminal female string educator in this field, and we are very grateful to have you on the panel. I'd like to invite you to tell us about how this field got started and what, in your estimation, have been the biggest challenges women have faced in this field since its inception.
Do I have 5 hours? Well, the original alternative style or eclectic style, multi-style players were really the African American slave fiddlers. They're taught to play not out of the kindness of the plantation owner's heart, but because the plantation owner could make money off of a good player, or have that person entertain whenever they threw parties. Cy Gilliat played all the Virginia state balls. He was not a free man, but he didn't have to do hard labor in the fields. With the evolution from slavery into emancipation, many of these blues fiddlers had already co-invented with singers, the style that we call the blues, out of work songs and the pentatonic scale from West Africa. They had already learned to play classical tunes, show tunes, popular tunes of the day, and on their own time they were playing the blues. Once freed, many of them joined string band groups or migrated to cities where they could not be heard in clubs over drums and people talking because there wasn't amplification. And they went on to play in the red light district, and then many of them made incredible livings playing for the silent films. And that's where playing all these different styles really came to the fore for these silent films. And then they were all wiped out in one day when the talking films came out. And it took me many, many decades to figure out what had happened to all these players. I think, because of racism in this country, this information never really reached the string community, string teachers who are on the Western canon side of things. And so the research that I did for my blues fiddle book, I did not find a single female fiddler that came from that whole circle of players, because many of them were recorded in the 30s and 40s playing backup for black blues singers. First, the women were allowed to be recorded as a test by OK Records, and then later the men. That means that anyone who did pay attention to this would not have had the inspiration, if that player was a female, the inspiration of seeing other women doing this. And I think if we were to do a study worldwide of all of our different roots styles, and there's roughly 35 bowstring styles worldwide, we would find this chain father to son a passage in every country. It's taken a long time for this to come into a beautiful balance, which I think we have entered now, that time period, thank goodness. So for me, my grandmother was a musician in my family, and she was dragged off of the steps of City Hall protesting for the right to vote. And she told me, if you want to see something change, do it yourself. And that was an incredible, I've turned to that advice throughout my life. After she died, the last time I saw her in a vision at night, she taught me how to ice skate uphill. And I have been ice skating uphill ever since, with her holding my hand and pulling me. So in 1976, after already playing at many folk festivals, before I was really deserved to be, I don't think I was good enough to be included, and I was the only female instrumentalist. Yes, there were women singers who accompanied themselves on guitar or banjo. I realized that I needed to do things to, not just to change things for women, but to change the string educational process in not just this country, but worldwide if I could. And so I produced 3 jazz string summits in the 1980s to introduce the public to the voice of bowed strings from around the world, and went on to create 2 national public radio series in the 80s. So in around 2001 or so, I contacted ASTA because I was just learning about ASTA, and they hadn't had a standalone conference yet. They were sharing it with MENC, as it was called back then. And I pointed out that they were ignoring most of the bowed string music of the world. They were focusing just on Western canon. It didn't make sense to me. Then I was invited, as was Renata, to be on a committee to launch the rest of the world and introduce ASTA teachers to that. And interestingly enough, I mean, here's our first point of this discussion, that a man who had incredible credentials in his life as a classical player and who have enormous respect was appointed to be the head of our committee. So that reflected, number one, a lack of understanding of the need to have someone who actually knew the field to head the committee, and number two, that, you know, I think there was this idea that a man could do it better. Maybe I'm wrong, okay? I can't speak for who made those decisions back then, but back then it was mostly men that were making those decisions for ASTA, as far as I could see. Happily, so much of this has changed since 2003, and I was very, very careful in inviting. ASTA gave me permission to invite non-ASTA members to be at that conference in 2003 when I was setting up the schedule. And I was very careful to have a balance between men and women that were invited to present. And it was an incredible, incredible experience. But we were we were so popular, even though they stuck us in a building that you had to walk a distance to get to. And all the classical events were in the main building, right? So again, you see how much has changed. It's a very positive thing. We had standing room only going down every hallway for every single session, the whole conference, and the classical people got very annoyed because they weren't getting the attendance that we were. So the next year, when I became chair of the committee, we were scheduled into Thursday and Friday, and then the big classical stuff was on Saturday. So we're moving in a great direction. I think that ASTA it's like a beautiful mirror. But in this kind of mirror, you don't really know which is the image and which is the person looking in the mirror, because from both sides and all sides, this has gradually, through all of our efforts, been changing. And we still have a long way to go, but we're getting there, and it's taken me a long time to even be able to say that. Hope that gives a good comprehensive answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for the work, because we know without representation, it's a different community. You have a different sense of community when you're connected to people who are your peers. And if you don't have that, then I think you're in a different line in the bathroom, you're in a different table in the cafeteria, and all of those small transactions that you kind of paved the way for us to be able to enjoy our community that we have today on this panel. Thank you, Julie. We really are grateful to you. I'm going to move down our panel for a second, and I would like to kind of segue to someone who is doing a really interesting job creating networks. She's what I call the queen of the big ask. Beth Fortune, literally not afraid to ask anyone to, when I pitched the idea of this panel to her, because she's a close friend and part of that community that I now enjoy of other women, and I'm grateful to. She said, just call Rhiannon Giddens, and that's who you want. And so she's a person that I think anytime we break with tradition, it requires a certain amount of just brazen confidence, and Beth represents that to me. Beth, you're currently a public school orchestra director with one foot in the classroom and one foot in the working music industry. And I think that I heard you coin a term that is called music industry literacy. Just a great phrase. It's hard to say who came up with that, but you were the first person to say that to me. Why or why not do you think orchestra teachers choose to engage with multi-styles, and how can they become more brazen?
Well, I think the why might be in that they were given opportunities to have experiences within those styles when they were younger, and somebody was a mentor to them and showed them that style and showed them that community and held their hand through the door into that community. Why not? I believe that in traditional upbringing of most players of stringed instruments, we are given private lessons, which is standing in a room with a teacher and a pencil and a music stand, and the Bach or the Brahms or whatever is on the stand, and the teacher is writing in exactly how you need to feel about that music and how you need to interpret it, and they write it in for you, and you go home and you practice, and then you come back and then you show that you have interpreted that music to the teacher's liking, and then you go on to the next set of 20 measures or whatever. And then you go into public school programs, and what's sanctioned is the Eurocentric style of band, orchestra, and choir. So when you go to an orchestra class in a public school, you sit in a semicircle, you are handed music from the Western art music tradition. You're given a pencil or told to bring a pencil, and a person stands on a box with a stick, and that person waves it around and then stops and tells you what to write down in the music, and the cycle continues. You go into college and you're taught how to be that person on the box with the stick and how to teach a private lesson. And so those of us that in our younger years did not have that mentor, did not have that person to handhold you across the break into that community of whatever style, whatever multi-style it is, say bluegrass or jazz or whatever, you just aren't given those opportunities. You don't feel qualified. You don't feel a part of any community. You feel like kind of an imposter, and therefore you don't jump into it and you don't program it. And maybe the only thing you do is you purchase a piece on a large music retailer that says jazz in it or blues or something, and then, or fiddle and call it good. So that's the why and why not from my perspective.
Um, let's talk about what happens when you do, and you start moving through those layers of basic uncomfortability. It sounds like, you know, as we take more risks, we expose ourselves to the criticism of others, and I've experienced this in my own career. One thing that in fact, fear, you know, fear is often a critical paradigm.
Mhm.
And so for you, you've been the director, Beth, of education for the Wintergrass Festival for some time now, working with Bob Phillips, Andy Carlson, Renata for many years has been on that team, and you invited me to be a part of that team. What happens at Wintergrass? And let's get to the nitty gritty for those of us who are public school teachers and listening to this panel. What can you do to replicate what happens at Wintergrass in your program tomorrow?
Well, Wintergrass is a large-scale acoustic music festival. It's one of the larger ones that happen worldwide. It's an award-winning festival, and there's a special emphasis placed on acoustic music at this festival, although it does feature music from people from around the world. And we also have a special place in our heart for bluegrass. But that being said, Wintergrass is a really, really big part of the Pacific Northwest bluegrass acoustic music community. And I found myself just, I guess, in a way, needing to walk across into that community by myself, and you know, just knowing that you know, I didn't have like a community that I grew up in where I learned how to play fiddle. So I just had to do it by myself. And the bluegrass community has a way of telling you when you're not doing it right. And I definitely stepped into those pitfalls many times and learned a lot along the way. And we could have a whole other session about that. But I found myself as a person who was driven and very interested, and putting, I guess, my skills as an educator into what I was doing in the bluegrass community. I found myself in the position of being asked to create educational programming for this festival, and I was just like, okay. And one of the people you did not mention as part of our integral team at Wintergrass, and I would say is one of my original asks, was a person I met in an elevator at the Tacoma Sheraton. And all of you know who this is, Joe Craven. And I sat on the elevator with Joe, and knowing that I had, you know, spent my college years going around watching him perform with David Grisman and just, you know, oh, I'm not worthy kind of thing, standing in the elevator with Joe Craven. I just decided I'm gonna ask. And that started a big, long collaboration with Joe. Me bringing him to my school to perform with my students and I for many years first. And then we transitioned that whole thing into basically the programming for education at Wintergrass. And so Joe became one of my teaching partners at Wintergrass, along with our other camp, which is like a full-on orchestra event at Wintergrass that holds space for school orchestras to come and perform with. I mean, at this point, we've performed with almost every person on my bucket list. It's crazy. I'm continuing to create that bucket list now. But yes, so with Renata and Bob, Andy Carlson, Joe Craven, we've created kind of a very unique educational world that I definitely hope that teachers feel that they can, step out and initiate with music festivals in their community. So Annie, I've recently brought you into the fold at Wintergrass to lead a program for teenagers that actually does focus on music industry literacy. And you've had one successful year of programming that program. But after the last live Wintergrass, like weeks after the last live Wintergrass, we found ourselves in a situation with COVID, and everyone had to do the big pivot. So can you tell me, Annie, what you have done with your educational endeavors, with your group, the Free Strings in Liberty, Iowa? Can you talk a little bit about that? What's the connection between online teaching and multi-styles and social justice, which is very, very important. We find now that we are in this moment where addressing social justice is absolutely critical for when we go back to whatever going back is going to be looking like.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Beth. And I'm going to just provide a few basic statistics. I'm in my PhD program, so I read and I kind of discern, is what's happening to my classroom happening in other places? And I find great value in kind of the universality of some of these issues that I saw people kind of perk up when you connect online education with social justice or anti-racist curriculum or equity, because I think in secondary orchestra, about 20%, well, in any given high school or middle school, 20% of the student body is participating in music. And unfortunately, in our public school system, very few of these programs allow for a student to just come in with no experience whatsoever. So when I look at racial and gender participation in orchestra, what I see is that there's a correlation between previous participation and race. And so in order for us in the public schools to provide more opportunities for more kids, because certainly we don't want 20% of kids in any given school in music. We want to push that number, and we want more kids involved in music, and we want more kids to play for their whole life. And so the idea that if you didn't do it by 14, you're never going to be able to participate in it needs to be challenged by things like online videos in basic technique that allow a student to come in and make up for the time that they may have missed out. It gives us an opportunity. I know when I put together my online method, I brought in my friend Blake Shaw, who is a Black man and plays jazz bass, because I wanted students all over to see me in a video with someone who might look like them. I think this representation piece is very important, and it's a dial that I always ask, like, am I changing what's happening, or am I just talking? Am I talking the talk, or am I walking the walk? And the biggest piece is for us to the other piece with the 20% of kids who participate in music programs in the public school is that only 5 to 10% of that 20%, a very small percentage of these students, will actually participate in music as adults. So we are reaching a very small number of students in the public schools. And as a democracy-minded educator, every day I'm trying to chip away at that number and at the idea that students are supposed to know what it is to be a musician by the time they graduate from high school, which just, I don't know about any of you, but I'm 45 and I still don't know what the music industry really is. Every day I have to wake up early and fix my coffee and bow down and say, what am I doing today? Because it would seem that the more I learn, the more I realize there is to know. So the online piece, I want to come back to that at the very end and give everyone an opportunity to talk on that issue, because I believe that all of us have made this transition, that all of the resources that we've put together, both before the pandemic and now and to come, will survive for years. These are precious resources, and we have them forever now. So there's a lot to be said about that. I'd love to, I'm going to ping pong back to Renata here. And Renata is someone I find a lot of meaning in jazz. I'm a bluegrass player myself, but I found in the Midwest that teaching students to improvise over chords, which to me is the magic skill in the music industry, in my experience, is being able to play songs you've never heard before by ear and guess what's going to happen in them. And to me, bluegrass was like the other white meat. In some ways, it can be very narrow culturally. And so I look to jazz. I went to Berkeley. I have great respect for people who are proficient jazz musicians, and Renata is certainly one of those. Renata, you've been in many of the formative roles in alternative styles and now multi-styles. You've spanned the sometimes disparate worlds of jazz, publishing, classroom teaching, and extensive workshopping and camps. What advice might you give a young woman or man who's starting out and wants to enjoy both a life of teaching and performing?
I think perseverance is number one. I think if you've listened to everyone speaking on this panel, you'll notice that everyone here is extremely stubborn and doesn't stop playing whatever it is that they want to do when someone tells them not to do that thing. And I'll have you know that it wasn't until I was getting my PhD and I worked with Danny Rothmuller, who was the assistant principal at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, that I had a teacher that didn't tell me to quit. Every single one of my teachers told me to quit, and I did not do that. Because I have a strange way, I guess, of learning. At any rate, be stubborn, keep going, dive deep, and take lots of field trips. So the other thing that I learned, very much so, was that I didn't know what I liked, really. And it took me a long time to find the thing that I liked, and I still don't know what it is that I love the most, but I think I like improvising with other people the most, which has been trying this year, I must say. And I learned that because I saw the Turtle Island Quartet perform for the first time, and I had never ever seen anybody do that. I didn't know that you could do that on a string instrument. Didn't occur to me. I had grown up in classical strongly. I knew musical comedies because my dad loved to watch the old 30s and 40s and 50s things, so I watched them with him. But so I actually knew all the things that jazz people were doing. I knew the tunes, but I didn't know how. I couldn't even play Happy Birthday by ear by the time that I finished my PhD, and that is not. I'm not even exaggerating. So I was lucky that I just continued learning, and that's what I think that everyone should do. Learn how to do anything that you can. Learn how to conduct, because sometimes you might have to conduct. Learn how to teach. If you are a player, you're going to have to teach. At some point, you can't always play. Something's going to come up. You don't know what it is. Do learn how to do that. You've got to learn how to teach as well as play. Do learn how to play. Play lots of stuff. Play well. Practice. Don't practice so much you die. Do practice a lot. Learn how to arrange tunes. At some point, you're going to be in a band, or you're going to be in a string quartet. You're going to have to learn how to arrange something. It's going to happen. Don't kid yourself. Learn how to transcribe. You're going to have to transcribe the thing you're listening to. I don't care if it's Phantom of the Opera or what? God forbid. And then volunteer for stuff. You don't know. There's going to be something that's going to be extremely good for you, and that thing is going to be something that you volunteered for, like being part of ASTA, or in my case, I went to the IAJE for the first time in 2000, just on a lark with a friend of mine who was a singer, and that's where we started the whole jazz consortium, which we called the IAJ String Caucus, and that got folded in later on into ASTA when I got to work with Julie. And if I hadn't volunteered and been a part of a bigger thing, I would never have met all the people that I got to meet later. Lead. Don't be afraid to lead. Jump right in. Say yes. Nobody else wants to say that they'll do all the stuff. I'll do it. Okay. I will be the president of the Jazz String Caucus, or I will, I'll do the Wintergrass thing. Yes, do all those things. Don't be afraid to do it later. Do it now. Now's the time.
Thank you, Renata. You had what Ben Zander calls the shining eyes. That was beautiful. And you briefly mentioned Daryl Anger, and I'm going to pivot to Enion, who grew up in the Bay Area as well. And Enion had Beth mentioned, actually, just in the synergy of community, and this is just that value of community, the value of representation. Beth mentioned that she loved catching Enion in her work with her bands. And so we have this relationship with one another that's so special. Enion, in our conversation, you talked about how you essentially, and this has been a theme through the panel, you invented your own career. It didn't exist, so I had to invent it. And if had it not been for people like Regina Carter or Daryl Anger, that you might not have had a blueprint. What does representation mean to you in the industry? And how are you practicing being of service to other women and humans in general who might follow in our footsteps?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Annie, so much for having all of us. And it's such a tremendous excitement and honor and slightly nerve-wracking to be on this panel with all of you who are just such inspiring women. I started out, as I think many of us did, as very deeply immersed in the classical world, but I was tremendously fortunate to have been exposed to a lot of diverse music growing up in the Bay Area. My parents took me to see Turtle Island String Quartet and Daryl Anger's other projects growing up in the Bay Area in the 80s. And so I was seeing all this incredible music on the one hand. On the other hand, I was deeply immersed in youth orchestra programs. I was at the San Francisco Conservatory prep pre-college program. And for whatever reason, I never connected this music I was seeing and the music I was making. In particular, I say that because I was spending a lot of my time improvising, because I was seeing all this music and inspired by it and spending a significant portion of my practice time improvising, and yet still never making that connection. And somewhere around the middle of college, I came home from school for the summer. I was part of the Mendocino Music Festival's Young Artists program, and I was playing in the orchestra with all these people from the San Francisco Symphony, the LA Philharmonic, and I was really struck by how just deeply unhappy they seemed with their lives and music, which was completely confounding to me. I loved music at the time, but that experience being with these just bitter, jaded people was a really sad turnoff. And that same summer, my dad brought home Regina Carter's Something for Grace album and put that on for me. And that was the first time, I really experienced and really noticed like somebody like me making music like the music I was naturally drawn to making. Um, and so I went back to school with these sort of two different interesting messages about my own career path. And from then on out, it was sort of just a mission to figure out what I'm supposed to do now. I've invested so much time in my life in creating music, becoming pretty good at it, and what do I do when this path I've been put on is not what I'm supposed to be doing. So I sought out different people, and one person I sought out was Daryl Langer, who has been a tremendous mentor over the years. But the way that representation comes into it is that this moment of hearing Regina Carter for the first time, and there are a couple other women who I would single out as really important people in the formation of my career direction, one of them being Carla Kihlstedt from Tin Hat Trio, and now she's doing different things, but that was her first really noticeable effort, who is a wonderful player who sings while she plays, which is something that I do, and I'm very passionate about teaching all interested students who want to learn how to do it to do, because I think it's a very useful musicianship skill. So just seeking these people out, but it was seeing these women carving their own path that got me on my path, and that's the essence of why representation matters. It's not, some kids are different. Some kids have their vision no matter what, but for the vast majority of kids in music, especially with the kind of lives that they have these days, with so many things going on and so many things to think about in our complex world, to have people sort of occupying the spaces they would like to occupy, or they might like to occupy, that are like them in some way. For me, my intersectional identity with Regina Carter is that I am a woman. She is a woman, and so I saw her there and thought, well, I could be there too, and that's why it's important. It illuminates possibility, and from there, you can find guides along your path from all different communities, but having people that illuminate possibility is essential if we're going to have young musicians who make music for the rest of their lives, who are like all of you, who are guiding lights for others. And just by the act of performing, writing my own music, singing songs and playing, I hope that I'm doing a lot to be a guiding light for other people, other young women.
And you are, and you're doing it at the Denver School for the Arts, which is a great placement and one of those dial markers where it shows that the institutions are changing. One of my goals in the panel was to give people who are listening a very hard and fast idea of what they can do to grow the multi-styles in their programs. And certainly our final speaker today has done that in her life. She expressed, she told me a very funny story that she was teaching a workshop one day, and she asked the student to just kind of do a call and response, and the student said, "Am I allowed to do that?" And I thought that would have been the best name for this panel. Am I allowed to do that? And of course, for all of our people who are watching, the answer is yes, you are allowed to do it. We give you permission. Go into that dark night. But I'm really excited to introduce Martha. She has high coolness factor. There's no way around the fact that high coolness factor matters. She played with David Bowie. That's really cool. But Martha, in the world, in the realm of music industry literacy, you are one of one of few string educators who are highly knowledgeable about issues like copywriting and song licensing, the Grammy process, registering with ASCAP. These are things about the music business that you bring to the table with your work with students. Tell us about your new program of multi-style string study at New Jersey City University. We have to have a place that we send our brightest and best students. This is certainly one of them, but tell us about how this program and others like it can start to narrow the gap between what happens in the classroom and what happens in the music industry.
Right. Well, thanks, Annie. And it's really a pleasure to be with all of you amazing women. And I just wanted to say along the way, I didn't give myself barriers, or I wasn't permitting myself to accept any barriers. And so I just kept finding my way. And so where I am today in being able to build this program from scratch, basically, I was asked to grow the string program at New Jersey City University. And I've been in this industry for over 30 years. I have just kind of made my way, like, okay, I heard Jean-Luc Ponty for the first time when I was in high school, and that was my revelation moment. Like Turtle Island String Quartet also, and Laurie Anderson, they were all like, wow, I never knew I could do these things. And it wasn't that I'm a girl, or, wasn't a boy or whatever. And so I just started experimenting on my own and reaching out and exploring. And along the way, I discovered improvisation, and improvisation led me to composition, and of course electronics, because that was, it was like Jean-Luc Ponty, jazz, electronics, put it all together. And so it took me a long time to find my voice, find where I was going, and along the way, started creating these workshops and these clinics on electric strings, plugging in, Zen and the art of conceptual improvisation, and am I allowed to do that? And just all these things that I kept finding that were interesting to me, and I realized, needed to be explored. And one of the things I always said, and this goes way back when Julie put one of the first books on alternative styles, and I remember talking about the fact that I was always looking for a school program that I could be part of. And it never really was. I mean, I was finding these wonderful people in ASTA, in IAJE, which is, and now at Gen, and just, through all the different worlds that I've been involved with, through, rock and roll and collaborations with Razel Beatboxer and tours and Broadway and many different worlds. And it was sort of the same way that I had that revelation years ago. I woke up literally like a year and a half ago, and I said, aha, it's multi-style. That's what I've been doing all these years. And for me, that was the word, that was the term that really hit home, because I was never comfortable with being an eclectic player or alternative player. I do classical. I mean, one of my last gigs, before this shutdown was playing with the American Composers Orchestra in New York City. I was playing at Carnegie Hall in February, and so I still do all of that. That's all part of my repertoire. But along the way, I became a composer. I became an improviser. I learned how to work with electric strings and experiment with electronics. And so this, having the opportunity to grow a string department and saying, well, if you want me to grow a string department, I would like to do a multi-style string program where it embraces all styles. So it's not just classical, and then if you don't play classical, it's something else, or it's classical, or it's jazz and something else. I said I would like to embrace it where, we're right across the river from New York City. We have access to all the most amazing teachers right here. Plus, of course, now we're by extension online, which is something that we were kind of forced to do within this past year, and learn how to do that, by the way. So in this past year, I've been creating a Master's of Music in Multi-Style Strings, a Bachelor of Arts in Multi-Style Strings. And I, all of you that have your advanced degrees, boy, I give you so much credit, because I have a master's degree in performance, but I'm creating these programs through academia. So I feel like I'm getting my honorary PhD. I'm going to give it to myself by doing this. But, I never I accepted that there were barriers in front of me. I couldn't do something because I was a woman, or I couldn't do something because I don't have a PhD, or couldn't do something because I don't play this style or other. And I'm not, I do not go into a recording session and say I'm the best jazz player or fiddle player. In fact, I have people calling me that want to study with me, and I'm like, you know what? I think you should study with Regina Carter, or you should study with Jeremy Kittle, because that's more of the style that you're looking for, and I can help expand in other ways. If you want to learn, work with electronics or free improvisation or conceptual, with other, I know what my specialties are, and I'm not going to, presume to take that away from somebody, that opportunity. So that's in a really quick nutshell. So we have New Jersey City University, which also, it's a public institution. So it's affordable and it's versatile. And again, in 10, 15 minutes, you're in New York City. And so that was really exciting for me to build a program like that here that's accessible to everybody. I mean, of course, there's also scholarships if you're, you have the GPA and other things available. But there's wonderful programs out there. There's nothing quite like this. And part of it is, I bring my whole history of 25, 30 years. Everybody that I talk, I was mentioning, I can call people up on the phone and say, I'm doing this program. Can you, do some teaching, or can you, do a master class? I had Michael League from Snarky Puppy do a master class last week, because that's what my multi-style strings chamber ensemble is doing. I said, what would you like to do? We have people that have, have jazz chops, classical chops, some fiddle chops, some all over the place chops, some more experienced in improvisation, some had no experience really in online recording or doing online. How do you teach chamber music online, with the delay and the latency? And so we started figuring that out, and they wanted to jump right in by playing Lingus by Snarky Puppy. Nice. So that was one of the first things we did, and boy, was that a huge learning curve. There's a few rhythms in there, and then figuring out how to get it all together where we're, playing the same piece. And we learned a lot along the way by trial and error, which is sort of how I've done my career. But now, looking back, I can offer this and help the next generations move forward. And that I've been through this. I have experience with ASCAP. I've set up workshops through them. I'm on the Grammy board. I have a lot of connections because it's relevant to what I want to do in my career. And so I learned about them. I became involved with them, and was talking with a friend of mine, Dave Egger, who's also on the faculty. So I've got Regina Carter and Dave Egger and Jeremy Kittle and some really wonderful people on the faculty. And Dave said, one of the things they don't teach you in a conservatory is artist relations. They teach you how to be the best player, and absolutely. And you can do that in any school, any conservatory, or any school where you're studying to be a performer. They don't necessarily give you the tools to know how to deal with people, to, be a contractor, how to copyright your music, how to, I'm one of the new things that I'm doing is building a sound library, a sample library. And that's something that's new for me. Well, that's another source of income that we need to know. When we graduate, when everybody graduates, they're independent, you know, they're entrepreneurs, basically. So they're independent contractors. They need to know and think of themselves as a business. And so they need to have these tools. Doesn't matter, you know, male or female, that whatever, you need to have these tools, and more power to you as a, you know, if you're not a male, what can I say? Just, you know, I did a workshop for the Audio Engineering Society the other day, and for their student chapters, and most of the people on the call were women, and it didn't occur to them that that was something weird, you know, abnormal or not normal. And I gave them a shout out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're mostly women and doing this audio engineering program." So, you know, look, I know we're going to talk a little bit more, but I know we're all available. We all talk to each other, and we learn from each other too, and we bring different things to the process. So, you know, anybody that's listening to this, you can find us. We're all online, and reach out to us and follow up on this conversation. That's what we do. That's you know, part of what we do. So.
Thank you, Martha. That's a great segue into our final portion of this, which we're going to fast forward because we're 2 minutes from our time. And I really appreciate the insight that everyone has had here. To follow up on Martha's point, my students will be working with Julie Lyonn Lieberman later this month. By the time this is aired, your online Strings Without Boundaries will have occurred already, but there's always another edition of that coming out. I have sent my students to DSA, and many of my private lesson students work with Enion. These are the same kids that will come to Wintergrass and participate in the work that Beth and Renata do there, and now they have a place to go to college that won't sidetrack them into believing that there are rules where there are not rules. And so creating vertical alignment in all this while remaining in the spirit of true networking and helping each other, I think, just as professionals, and since it is a Herstory panel, as women as well, I think that together we can move this dial forward. And this is just the very final piece. It's been a long year. By the time we see this, hopefully we're 3 months into 2021, but let's have a quick toast to the future of women in the multi-style movement and to the success and health of everyone out there. Thank you so much for being with us.
Woo!
Cheers.